So now I have an expression that relates my total trade flow to the income in the destination market, the price index, and the price in the destination market, multiplied by NI. Simply plugging in what I already derived from the demand side. If you don't see it, if I have to explain it again, ask. No? So this is a basic setup. So I start out with calculating the share of me in the destination country using monopolistic competition, demand side, the definition of the price index, introduce transportation cost, calculate the total value of the trade flows, that's simply the number of varieties I'm producing times the value of each variety to the destination market, and finally I see that the total value of my trade equals this particular expression. Yeah? What's step number 5? Now I assume that the total output of country J, so what they earn, is spent anywhere. So if you produce commodities, that also gives you income. You sell to all destination markets, including your own country, and then the total value of all your export flows to all destination countries should be equal to the value of production. So I'm selling to all destination markets, including my own country, and that should equal the value of total production. Yeah? So now I know that this should equal that. And we can rewrite this equation by using a little algebra as follows, where we have a new term, a kind of price index term that is defined as this. So we can simply use this term, rewrite it in terms of this equation, where we use the fact that this term should equal this term. Yeah? Frowning faces, or do you see it? Do you understand it? Yeah? Now we have an interesting equation. This term can be rewritten as this term, where we use this idea from here to substitute away the total value of all trade flows to all destination markets, including the home country, and we have a new equation. Now go back. Remember this term. I see that here. So I can plug that in here. And if I plug that in, finally I arrive at this particular formulation. This is the result of this assumption. This is from the demand side and the share. And this is because you trade and sell to all destination market that can be nearby or far away. And these are the two price indexes. Now this is a very basic formulation of the Griffith model. So what do we have? Size of the home country, size of the foreign country, and corrected for trade cost. So this is a very simple derivation of the Griffith model. Now I'm using a little algebra. Check if you see what I'm doing. But this is the most basic formulation and also derived by Anderson and van Ginkel. Comparing it, yeah?
Well, you already mentioned...
Does it work?
Is it working? You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You already mentioned that this is a very basic derivation. Maybe this is a little too advanced, but how do we include multilateral resistance into this? What would be the next steps?
This is the multilateral resistance. These two terms, the two price indices.
Okay.
There will be a question next week, so I'm keeping it a bit, well, you have to wait a week, because one of the questions is about these multilateral resistance terms. But the multilateral resistance terms are here. So the basic Tinbergen formulation of the gravity model look like this. Income of, my income, the income of the foreign country, divided by distance. This was the basic Tinbergen formulation. Now, Anderson van Winkoop, given the derivation that I just showed you, has shown that this formulation is wrong. Why? Because it misses these two price indices. And these two price indices are the multilateral resistance terms. Now, if you discuss it next week, what I'd like to hear in your answer is also the intuition of the multilateral resistance terms. So don't simply mention they're there, they work in the equation, but I'd like to have an intuition. So why are they so very important? Now, of course, these equations are estimated. So a typical outcome of the gravity model is that we have elasticities, we have actual data for GDP, we have actual data for imported GDP, we have actual data on the distance, and we have dummies for if you are a neighboring country, if you have a common language, well, if you are former colonies, if you are part of a regional trade agreement. Now what you see is that these elasticities are relatively large. Now this is a typical outcome. Now distance is a negative effect, but this is what you typically see. So income, GDP, or structural gravity is very good in explaining all these trade flows, especially if you correct for distance, and you can add all these additional aspects that also add to distance, cultural distance, institutional distances, all sorts of other distances. That's included here. Yeah?
Just for clarification, what's the difference between all gravity and structural gravity?
If you look at the income GDP, what people do if they estimate, they simply plug in GDP, that's it. Well, what you should do is only plug in that production share of GDP that is produced for exporting. So the non-traded sector is not here. So you have to use a more sophisticated formulation for GDP. But the difference, as you see here, is not very large. Okay. This is what we will discuss next week. So a few outcomes. The McKellen outcome, very famous article that discusses the effects of borders. So what McKellen did, I hope you can see it. Well, let's scribble again here. He looked at Canada here, compared it to the US. He says, well, what is trade between two Canadian provinces? What is trade between two US states? Now, trade is large. And compare it to trade across a national border. Now, what McKellen found is that if you compare these trade flows, so within the country trade flows, to trade flows across national border, the effect was enormous. It reduced trade by a factor of 22. So there was a huge border effect, implying that crossing a national border, crossing institutional differences, possible language differences, possible exchange rate differences had a huge impact. That's what's seen here. Now the discussion in Veenstra is that this is fine. However, if you do a correct estimation, effect is still large, not a factor 22 but 10, if you use the correct formulation. Yeah?
So if I understand correctly, they estimate the border effect by comparing how the trade was between industries in US versus industries in Canada, but how can you attribute that to the border effect? I mean, country differences also play a role, right?
Yeah, so what they did, they say, well, let's look at trade between two states, trade between two provinces, and compare the size of the trade. So these are all very nearby. distance is more or less the same. Compare it to the trade between the state and the province. Now, what you see is that the trade in this square of states and provinces suddenly drops if you cross a national border. And that suggests that the border effect, crossing a national border, is huge. Yeah. Okay, let's have a short break. Reconvene in 5-10 minutes. Say yes.
Yes.
Could you follow what I was saying?
Yes, I just don't understand the equation where you started with the gravity. We write for bilateral trade, this one. I don't understand the intuition.
Well, it's the same idea. So look at this demand equation.
Yeah.
It's what the buyer has of income, price indices, and the price of your commodity.
Yeah.
Now let's assume we don't have only one destination market, but we have J destination markets.
Oh,
So-
yeah,
Yeah?
yeah. I see. Okay, yeah.